So we first start off with the Industrial Revolution, where 80% of the population was rural. And in the Industrial Revolution, there are three stages: the agricultural, first Industrial Revolution, and the second Industrial Revolution. So the agricultural, there was poverty, there was enclosure, they had enclosure, which is enclosing of land with fences, and people started to think rational thought. First industrial revolution, we start to see labor spinning devices, spinning jenny, cotton gin, and steam engine. And then lastly, the second industrial, there's factories, there's iron and steel, there's textile mills. So why was Britain first to have all this? Well, Britain had a lot of things that other countries in Europe did not, such as coal, colonies, cotton, and of course, rivers. So then we get into the progress, and there were some people who were actually against modernity. They didn't like it, and that's called Romanticism. And Victor Hugo is one of those people, and we watched that in Les Miserables. Some people were hesitant to embrace modernity. For instance, Luddites responded by smashing machines, and there was other people who didn't like it. And then there were some people who actually embraced it, such as Nightingale. She actually responded quite well. She responded by writing and changed nursing forever. She's the founder of modern nursing. She made nursing into an honorable and a scientific profession. And there was other things going on at the same time as well, such as the changing role of religion, how there was a rejection of religion. Religion was seen as a moral force. And then we also get into the changing family structure. There was a breakup of families. When people were living in the countryside, they lived with their extended families. It took a lot of people to run a farm. But once they got into the city life, there was only one nuclear family per room. This also led to social mobility. There was a new middle class, the ability to change your social status, which is essentially the main idea of modernity. Now the man was able to provide for his family, with only the husband working. The women and kids did not have to work. Then we get into totalitarianism, which is communism and fascism. Under communism, we had Joseph Stalin. Stalinism was the measures he took to take control, and then he took an agricultural land and made it into a superpower. Propaganda was one of the methods that he used, and it promised a radiant future of communism, radiant future for the USSR. They used posters and films which promised that radiant future. But the present required sacrifice, and the rewards were assured. Then came something more horrible, which was the terror. And in the terror, we have the Great Purge and the gulags. The Great Purge was the Great Terror. And this is when the elite were targeted and they suffered. And Eugenia Ginsburg was one of these victims who fell victim to this. And she was sent to a gulag, which is a labor camp. And elite were targeted because they were a threat to Stalin. They had more influence, and they would be the ones who could oppose Stalin in any way, and he didn't like that. Then we start to see Nazism and the Holocaust. Not see, but we get into that. And this is the rise of a nation under Adolf Hitler. He was the chancellor of the Weimar Republic, and he was actually inaugurated by the people. And under him, Nazism spread like wildfire. Europa was a movie that we watched in class with Solomon, and he was a victim of this as a Jewish boy living during the time. And Hitler also used Nazi propaganda, such as Triumph of the Will, which depicted them as heroes and as if they were doing something good. And then, of course, he was a huge fan of art. So we had the great German art exhibition, which was supposed to call onto history to show how great Germany was. Um, and the art needed captions because people really didn't know what sometimes it stood for. And the Nazi policies, we had ghettos, death camps, and labor camps. And in Europa, his parents were actually sent to the ghettos, and a lot of people died there. And that's how it was horrible for the Jews during the time. World War II. The main players of World War II were USSR, Japan, Germany, US, and Britain. We actually didn't want to get involved, but we had to because Japan decided to attack Pearl Harbor, US declared war on Japan, and Germany declared war on us. The Japanese didn't like the US very much. They didn't like the West. They didn't want Western values to be imposed upon them. They believed that the Asians should have their own ways, and Japan wanted to spread their own influence. The Nazis also wanted to expand, which actually caused the separation of the Nazi and USSR pact. The Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact was broken up at the Operation Barbarossa when the Nazis went up and they invaded the Soviet Union, and this ended the pact. So in 1989, we start to see the fall of communism, and there were many aspects that led to this, such as the centralized economies, which means that if one thing goes wrong, the entire system messes up. During this time, there was also travel restrictions, there was repression from the secret police, and travel restrictions meaning that if they didn't trust you, you couldn't travel. Only loyal communists were allowed to leave. And then from 1985 to 1991, we had Mikhail Gorbachev, who reigned, and under him we had glasnost, which is openness, which is a policy of maximum publicity and transparency in all aspects of government, and it's also got rid of censorship. And perestroika, which is rebuilding, the modeling of the Soviet totalitarian system. Finally, for the first time, people were allowed to elect representatives. They had a vote. And people wanted reform. And along with the freedom came discontent. People could finally see what the West looked like. And with the resignation of Gorbachev was the end of communism. Lastly, we have postmodernity, and the postmodern culture is essentially just a response to modernity. And it relied on rationalism and empiricism, and people just question everything. They question rejecting modern values and ideas. They question whether we know the truth through science. They question whether new is always better. They're just questioning all the time. And postmodern idealistics was questioning and rejecting labels. So when it comes to religion, people don't want to be labeled. They're just aren't really religious anymore. As Professor Carlo said, I don't want to be labeled. They don't want to be labeled into sexuality, gender, anything. And in a sense, our life is a performance. Just as this presentation was.